Thank you. It was fun hanging out
Meri,
with you
it's
today.
the end of an era.
Well,
Meri Brown and Kody Brown's 32-year-long marriage was far more than just a chronology of shared time. It was an emotionally exhausting odyssey filled with sacrifice, heartbreak, emotional neglect, repeated cycles of manipulation, and, finally, self-redemption. What began as a commitment grounded in faith, unity, the principles of plural marriage soon unraveled into a twisted narrative of imbalance, where Meri's loyalty became a tool used against her and her devotion was consistently portrayed as a flaw. Millions of viewers watched over the years as Meri, once the first and only legal wife in the Brown family, transformed from an idealistic, hopeful young woman into someone caught in an emotionally destructive loop, publicly shamed, dismissed, and ultimately erased from the emotional equation by the very man she married. Through every shifting season of their reality TV show, Sister Wives, she bore the emotional cost of Kody's increasing disinterest, his public criticism, and the slow death of any meaningful connection between them, all while clinging to a hope that anything might be salvaged from the ruins of their relationship. In the early years, Meri stood by Kody with unwavering dedication. She navigated the complex emotional terrain of polygamy with grace, often pushing aside her own needs to uphold the larger vision of family unity that Kody preached but rarely practiced. As new wives entered the family, Meri, despite her internal struggles, attempted to maintain her position with dignity. But over time, it became increasingly evident that the emotional reciprocity she sought would never come. Instead, she was slowly sidelined, her emotions dismissed, her presence ignored, and her worth reduced to how conveniently silent she could remain. Kody's emotional withdrawal was not just painful, it was weaponized. He publicly labeled Meri clingy, manipulative, and dangerous, effectively assassinating her character in front of millions. And yet, she stayed. Perhaps out of belief in her marriage vows, perhaps out of hope that the man she married might still reside somewhere within the bitter stranger he had become. Her emotional breaking point came in 2015, when, in a moment of crushing loneliness and desperation, Meri formed a connection online, a digital cry for the companionship she no longer received in her marriage. Rather than examining the circumstances that drove her to such isolation, Kody seized upon it as proof of betrayal, weaponizing it as a lifelong stain on her character. From that moment onward, he used the incident to justify his complete emotional abandonment, narrating a version of events where he was the victim and Meri the untrustworthy spouse. The reality was far more complex. Meri had not been unfaithful. She had been emotionally starved. Yet the court of public opinion was influenced by Kody's framing, and Meri was left to carry the weight of guilt alone, as she always had. She continued to stay silent and hopeful, even as Kody's indifference calcified into cruelty. When the family uprooted and moved to Flagstaff, fans saw a glimmer of hope. Kody spoke of a new beginning, a fresh chapter. But that promise, like many before it, proved hollow. Instead of rebuilding with Meri, he distanced himself further. He rarely visited her, avoided one-on-one time, and made it clear in interviews that there was no longer a relationship to speak of. He repeatedly blamed her for the lack of connection, painting her persistence as pathetic rather than loyal. Meri, once again, found herself portrayed as the emotionally needy wife who couldn't take a hint. What the audience saw, however, was a woman who had given every part of herself to a relationship that had long stopped giving anything back. Then, just weeks before filming a new Talal episode, Kody made a sudden late-night phone call to Meri. It was the moment that would ignite a firestorm among fans and serve as a catalyst for Meri's final transformation. In the call, Kody spoke of grief, his grief over the end of their marriage. He claimed he was hurting, that he hadn't come to terms with what they had lost. On the surface, it might have sounded like a genuine attempt at reconciliation or closure, but those who had followed their journey and Meri herself knew better. This wasn't love. It was control. Kody was not mourning the loss of Meri as a partner. It was mourning the loss of his grip on someone who had finally begun to free herself. For decades, he had relied on her quiet loyalty, on her willingness to stay despite the rejection, on her emotional availability, even when he gave nothing in return. Now, with her finally stepping into independence, he panicked. This call was not a romantic gesture. It was a manipulative one. It was a textbook tactic from someone accustomed to using guilt, nostalgia, and sudden vulnerability to draw their partner back into the fold. But Meri was no longer the same woman who would fall for it. She saw the midnight grief confession for what it was: a last-ditch effort to reassert control, and in a powerful moment of self-respect. She responded not with softness, but with clarity and finality. She told him she would not carry his grief, that his pain was not hers to heal, that after years of emotional starvation, after being made to feel less than, after being cast as the villain in her own story, she was done. Social media erupted in applause. Fans who had watched her endure years of mistreatment celebrated this as the moment Meri finally took her power back. And it wasn't just a victory for Meri. It was a moment of triumph for every person, especially women who had ever been trapped in emotionally abusive relationships, who had been gaslit into believing their needs were unreasonable, their pain exaggerated, and their loyalty foolish. Meri's refusal to entertain Kody's grief wasn't cold-hearted. It was the first act of real self-love she had performed in decades. The symbolism of that midnight call cannot be overstated. For years, Kody had followed a pattern. He would withdraw affection, vilify Meri, then suddenly reappear with a show of emotion whenever he sensed she was slipping away. This wasn't about love, it was about control. And this time, Meri refused to participate. Her strength lay not in lashing out, but in simply stepping back, in declining the invitation to re-enter the cycle. Her calm, unwavering boundary was more powerful than any argument, and it marked the true end of their marriage, not legally, not even formally, but spiritually and emotionally. In reclaiming her autonomy, Meri showed a side of herself the audience had rarely seen. She was no longer hoping for reconciliation, no longer waiting for validation. She had stepped into her truth. And in doing so, she exposed the emotional abuse for what it was: a long pattern of devaluation, gaslighting, and neglect masquerading as complex marital dynamics. Kody's tears, once potent tools of guilt, now rang hollow. He wasn't grieving the end of love. He was grieving the end of control. And that, perhaps, is what made Meri's stand so deeply resonant. She wasn't just a reality TV figure anymore. It became a symbol of resilience, of what it means to draw a boundary so firm that no manipulation, no history, no regret can erode it. In rejecting Kody's final attempt to reclaim her, Meri didn't just walk away from a man, she walked away from the story he had written for her. And in doing so, she began writing her own. One rooted not in silence and shame, but in strength, clarity, and hard-won self-worth. This wasn't simply the end of a marriage. It was the end of Meri being cast as the discarded wife, the woman who wouldn't let go, the object of pity or disdain. It was the rebirth of someone who had been buried under decades of someone else's narrative. And in that rebirth, Meri gave voice to countless others who have spent their lives carrying pain that was never theirs to begin with. She showed them that healing does not require closure from the person who hurt you. It only requires the courage to stop seeking it. Kody may still believe he deserves sympathy. He may continue trying to rewrite history to paint himself as both villain and victim, but Meri no longer has a role in that play. She's not interested in the spotlight of his grief. She has found something far more valuable: her peace. And in the end, that is the most powerful legacy of all.
And now I will be moving forward with having that terminated. But that's going to take some time.
It was never just about Meri and Kody, it was about what Meri represented to so many people watching from the sidelines. Quietly relating, silently enduring, and eventually rising. The story, rooted in years of televised emotional strain, had become a microcosm of something much larger. A reflection of what happens when someone who has been emotionally sidelined and manipulated for decades finally says, "No more." When Meri refused to let Kody use her as a revolving door for his ego, it wasn't just a moment of personal liberation. It was a symbolic break in a toxic pattern that many fans have experienced in their own lives. Because if there's one universal truth about narcissists, it's that they hate losing their supply, and Meri. Once the cornerstone of Kody's carefully orchestrated narrative finally cut the cord. She cut him off completely, which meant that Kody was no longer in control. He had to face the unbearable truth that his power over her had evaporated. No more strings to pull, no more buttons to push, no more late-night manipulation masked as longing, and the audience felt that shift. The energy changed, and fans responded en masse. Comment sections flooded with stories of solidarity, pain, and victory testimonies from women and men who had been in Meri's shoes. Trapped in cycles of conditional love and silent suffering, the sister wives drama, always a spectacle on the surface, had transformed into a deeply relatable story for thousands who saw their own journey, reflected in Meri's quiet but firm refusal. Because when someone only shows up when they feel you slipping away, when their affection is conditional on your obedience, when their grief only appears once you've decided to walk away, it's control. And when Meri saw through Kody's midnight grief, called the phone ringing in the darkness, its voice dripping with rehearsed vulnerability, she didn't mistake it for love. She saw it for what it was, a final attempt to reel her back into his orbit, to make her feel responsible for his pain, to once again center his emotions over her well-being. And she didn't take the bait. That's the kind of growth that doesn't happen overnight. That's the kind of clarity that is earned through years of heartbreak, silence, disappointment, and soul-searching. That is the kind of moment that deserves a standing ovation, not just for its defiance, but for its clarity, for its boundary setting, for its absolute refusal to entertain a lie for 1 second longer. And while Kody might still be pacing in his head, crafting just the right emotional pitch to pull Meri back in, Meri's already on a different path, one that leads away from the chaos, away from the manipulation, and toward a version of herself she hadn't seen in years. She's not going back, no matter how carefully Kody scripts his regrets, because she's finally free. And fans, well, they're celebrating every second of it. What makes it even more compelling is how Meri's final no didn't just echo between her and Kody, changed the entire tone of the Sister Wives saga. Viewers who had been following this series since its inception remember the Meri who once stood at the heart of Kody's plural family. She was the rock, the pioneer, the one who said yes when others weren't even being asked yet. She gave up pieces of herself, her time, her voice, her emotional needs in the name of unity, in the name of faith, in the name of family. And what did she get in return? She became the afterthought, the spare, the fallback option when things didn't work out with others. She was sidelined, not just emotionally, but publicly. The man she once called her partner stopped even pretending to prioritize her. And yet, she stayed for years, holding on to the promise, to the hope, to the fragments of what once was. That's why this moment matters. Because this isn't just a phone call. She ignored this decades of emotional weight finally being weighed. I mean, sat down when Kody picked up the phone in the middle of the night to dial Meri. He wasn't just calling her, he was calling back a piece of himself that no longer existed. And fans saw it. They saw the shift. They saw the woman who once begged for crumbs finally look up and say, "I don't need this anymore." Kody, for all his accusations and grievances, couldn't see that the betrayal wasn't Meri's. It never was. The real betrayal was his, when he expected her to keep swallowing her pain while he chased joy elsewhere. When he demanded loyalty but offered none in return. When he punished her for reaching out while rewarding himself for constantly stepping out, the hypocrisy was always there, plain as day. But now Meri saw it too. And that's what made this final refusal so deeply satisfying. Out of revenge, but out of reclamation. In rejecting Kody's call, she wasn't just rejecting his voice. She was rejecting the script he had written for her. The version of her he insisted on playing in his tragedy. For once, Meri wasn't a supporting character in his narrative. She was the author of her own. That's why fans are calling this her comeback, not because she returned to something, but because she returned to herself. She stopped letting Kody define her. She started speaking for herself. And that's why the support for her has been overwhelming. People aren't just rooting for Meri, they see themselves in her. Because to survive gaslighting, emotional abandonment, and manipulation, and then have the clarity and strength to say enough, that's not just healing, that's triumph. Christine and Janelle have only added fuel to that fire. Christine, always honest and sharp in her insights, didn't hesitate to call out Kody's manipulative games. She saw through the tears, the rewriting of history, the selective memory. She said it before, Kody makes himself the victim of choices he was never forced to make. That he cried when Meri left wasn't a sign of love, was a sign of loss. Not the loss of her heart, but the loss of control. And Janelle, with her own history of on-again, off-again cycles with Kody, knew exactly what that phone call represented. She's lived that pattern, the doubt, the guilt, the seduction of second chances. She knows what it means when a man comes back, not because he values you, but because he's losing grip on the version of himself he created through you. Fans see this too. They're connecting the dots, weaving together years of small moments into a larger pattern that Kody can't hide from anymore. Because it's not just about Meri. It's about a man who has spent his life needing to be the center of everyone's world, regardless of the cost. The moment anyone dares to shift their gaze to prioritize themselves, to find light outside of his shadow, he panics. That's when the tears come. That's when the midnight confessions start. But this time, Meri didn't flinch. She didn't answer. She didn't beg. And that's what makes this moment so pivotal. While Kody spins this as a heartbreak, the women around him are exposing it for what it is: manipulation, emotional sleight of hand, a desperate attempt to regain a script that's no longer his to write. And Meri's refusal to play her part is more than personal, it's revolutionary. It breaks the cycle. It rewrites the rules. It shows that even the deepest emotional entanglements can be severed when clarity and self-worth finally cut through the noise. Fans aren't just watching, they're learning. They're healing through her. They're reflecting on their own lives. Because for years, Kody's image was that of a devoted, overwhelmed, but loving patriarch. But now that image is crumbling under the weight of his own actions. Meri, Christine, Janelle, they're all holding up mirrors. And what we're seeing isn't devotion. It's a web of control, fragility, ego, and manipulation. Okay. Meri's transformation since that call has been stunning. You can see it in her eyes, in her voice, in her presence. The desperation is gone. The silence is broken. The weight of Kody's validation no longer rests on her shoulders. She's walking taller, living louder, smiling wider. Insiders say she's been focused on therapy, travel, rediscovery. Hobbies that bring her joy. Conversations that nourish her soul. Places that reflect who she is, not who she was told to be. She's not hiding anymore. She's not waiting. She's not carrying anyone else's grief. And let's be real, she looks radiant. Not because of makeup or lighting, but because peace is the best filter anyone can wear. And fans notice. They're flooding her with messages like, "We always knew this Meri was in there, and she looks so much lighter now." 'Cause when you stop shrinking yourself to fit someone else's comfort, your real self starts to shine. And let's be clear, this isn't just about Meri moving on. It's about Meri reclaiming a story that was hijacked for too long. It's about her stepping out from behind the curtain and saying, "This is who I am. This is what I want. This is my life now." Fans are inspired, not just entertained. Because